Sometimes the world decides you are not worth loving before you even get the chance to prove them wrong. Brynhild knew that feeling intimately. In the frozen coastal village of Valdis, judgment was as harsh and constant as the winter wind. At 25, she was considered ancient by the standards of her people, a woman left on the shelf, written off as too old, too stubborn, and too sharp-tongued to ever make a proper wife. While other women her age bounced second or third children on their hips and managed bustling households. Brynhild spent her days gathering herbs on the cliffside and tending to her aging, silent father. She told herself she was content. She told herself she didn't need the warmth of a husband or the laughter of children. But in the long, dark nights of the north, when the fire burned low, the silence of her father's house screamed of her loneliness. Fate, however, has a cruel sense of humor. The blow came on a Tuesday evening, delivered with the casual indifference of a butcher severing a bone. The village elders had summoned her to the longhouse. She stood before them, hands clasped, expecting a reprimand for speaking out of turn at the market, or perhaps a request for her healing herbs. Instead, the high elder, a man with eyes like flint, refused to even look at her. "A match has been arranged," he announced, his voice flat. "The village can no longer support unwed women who contribute little to our alliances. You are to marry Skarde." The name hit the room like a heavy stone dropped into deep water. The silence that followed was suffocating. Skarde, the exile, the giant. Brynhild felt the blood drain from her face. Everyone knew the stories of Skarde. He lived alone in the abandoned Eriksson holding, high up the treacherous mountain path where civilized folk dared not tread. Rumors swirled around him like mountain mist, that he was cursed by the gods, that he had killed his own brother in a berserker rage, that he was more bear than man. He was a figure of fear, a bogeyman used to frighten children into obedience. "Father!" Brynhild turned to the old man standing in the shadows, pleading with her eyes. "Surely you won't allow this. He is a monster." Her father stared at his boots, shame coloring his cheeks, but his resolve remained iron. "It is decided, Brynhild," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We cannot afford to keep you through another harsh winter. Skarde has offered 3 piles of high-quality furs and enough salted meat to feed us for months. It is a good price for a woman of your years." Fearsome meat. She straightened her spine, pulling her dignity around her like a cloak. "Very well," she said, her voice icy. "If I am to be sold like livestock, then let it be done quickly." The wedding ceremony the next morning was brief, joyless, and attended only by those obligated to be there. The air was thick with fog when Skarde arrived. The sound of his horse's heavy hooves echoed in the square before he emerged from the mist. When he finally appeared, a collective gasp ran through the small crowd. He was everything the whispers promised and more. He was massive, a towering wall of muscle and fur that made the village men look like boys. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his shoulders spanning the width of a doorframe. His face was a landscape of scars and rugged terrain, hidden beneath a thick, dark beard that reached his chest. He wore worn leathers and a cloak that had seen 100 storms. He didn't speak a vow. He didn't smile. He simply nodded when the priest hastily concluded the rites. When he turned to Brynhild, she flinched, expecting roughness. But when he lifted her onto his massive warhorse, his hands, large enough to crush a skull, were surprisingly light. He placed her on the saddle with the care one might give a fragile glass vessel. They rode in silence up the winding mountain path, leaving the village and Brynhild's life behind. The air grew thinner and colder with every mile. The familiar sounds of the sea faded, replaced by the howling wind of the peaks. Brynhild refused to look back. She sat stiffly in front of the beast she had married, one hand clutching her grandmother's small iron knife hidden beneath her cloak. If he tried to hurt her, she told herself, she would not go down without a fight. The Eriksson holding was a lonely, desolate place. It sat in a bowl of rock, battered by winds, protected only by a few gnarled pines. The cabin itself was sturdy, built of massive logs, but it looked stark and unwelcoming against the gray sky. Skarde dismounted and helped her down. Up close, his sheer size was overwhelming. He smelled of pine resin, wood smoke, and old leather. He led her inside without a word. The interior was simple but surprisingly clean. A large fire crackled in the hearth, battling the mountain chill. He pointed a massive finger toward a small door off the main room. "Yours," he rumbled. His voice was deep, like stones grinding together deep underground. It was the first word he had spoken to her. Then he turned and vanished back out into the night to tend his horse. Brynhild bolted the door of her small room and pushed a heavy chest against it. She lay awake that first night, clutching the knife to her chest, listening to the wind screaming around the eaves, waiting for the monster to come and claim his rights. Every creak of the floorboards made her heart stop. But the monster never came. She woke before dawn, disoriented by the silence and the cold. Then she smelled it, a scent that didn't belong in a monster's lair. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the stench of unwashed hides. It was warm, sweet, and comforting. It was the smell of yeast, curiosity warring with fear. Brynhild moved the chest and cracked open her door. The main room was bathed in the warm orange glow of the hearth fire, and there, standing at the heavy wooden table, was Skarde. The sight stopped her breath. The giant warrior had rolled up the sleeves of his tunic, revealing arms thick with muscle and scarred from battle. But his hands, his massive calloused hands, were covered in flour. He was kneading dough. The man who was rumored to have slaughtered a dozen men with his bare hands was shaping bread loaves with the gentle, rhythmic motion of a mother tending a child. He worked with a focus and grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. He dusted the dough, folded it, and pressed it, his expression soft, almost peaceful in the firelight. Brynhild stepped on a loose floorboard, and it groaned. Skarde froze. The peace vanished from his face, replaced by a look of panic. He didn't growl or reach for the axe leaning by the door. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and looked down, his face flushing red beneath his beard. I woke you," he muttered, his voice rough with embarrassment. "I tried to be quiet." Brynhild lowered the hand that held the hidden knife. She stared at the flour on his arms, the perfectly shaped loaves waiting to be baked. "You bake?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Skarde looked at the floor, shrugging his massive shoulders. "My mother taught me," he rumbled softly. She said, "A man who can feed himself will never truly starve. It quiets the mind." Brynhild stepped fully into the room. The terror that had gripped her for 24 hours began to loosen its hold. "It smells wonderful," she admitted. "Better than the village baker." A shy, tentative smile touched the corner of the giant's mouth, disappearing almost as quickly as it came. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "It will be ready soon." Over the next few weeks, Brynhild watched him with the eyes of a hawk. She looked for the cruelty everyone said was there. She looked for the madness. But all she found was a quiet, lonely man living in a world that terrified him as much as he terrified it. She saw how he tended to his 2 goats, speaking to them softly in a language of clicks and whistles, checking their hooves with gentle concern. She saw him sitting by the fire in the evenings, carving delicate wooden birds with a small knife, his giant fingers moving with impossible precision to create feathers that looked like they could fly. She realized the village had lied, or perhaps they were simply blind. He wasn't a beast. He was a man who had been hurt so badly he had built a fortress around his heart and locked himself inside. It was a blizzard of legendary fury, burying the cabin in snow within hours. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the heavy timbers of the roof. They were trapped inside, the world outside reduced to a swirling white void. On the second day of the storm, a beam in the small barn cracked under the weight of the snow. Skarde grabbed his tools and rushed out to brace it, fearing for the animals. Brynhild waited by the door, anxiety gnawing at her. When an hour passed and he didn't return, she wrapped herself in furs and pushed out into the gale. She found him in the barn, lying on the straw, his face gray with pain. The beam had been secured, but in the effort, he had slipped. A jagged piece of wood had torn through his tunic, opening a deep gash in his side, an old war wound, she realized, that had never healed properly. "Skarde," she cried, rushing to his side. "It's nothing," he grunted through gritted teeth, trying to stand. "Just a scratch." "It is bleeding through your leathers, you stubborn fool," she snapped, her healer's instincts taking over. "Lean on me." It took all her strength to help him back to the cabin. Inside, she pushed him onto the furs by the fire and tore open his tunic. The wound was ugly, inflamed and angry, surrounded by thick scar tissue from a sword strike years ago. "This was not tended properly," she murmured, her hands moving quickly to gather her herbs, boiling water, and clean linen. "There was no one to tend it," Skarde said quietly, wincing as she cleaned the blood away. "I did it myself with a hot iron." Brynhild paused, looking at him. The thought of him alone in this cabin, burning his own flesh to stop the bleeding, broke her heart. "You are not alone now," she said firmly. She worked for an hour, stitching the wound, applying a poultice of yarrow and honey to draw out the infection. Skarde watched her the entire time, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and wonder. No one had touched him with anything other than violence for years. Her hands were cool, efficient, and surprisingly gentle. When she finished, she sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You must rest. No heavy lifting for a week." "Thank you," he whispered. "Brynhild." It was the first time he had used her name. "Tell me," she said, seizing the moment of vulnerability. "Tell me why you are really here. Why the exile? Why does the village call you a monster?" Skarde stared into the fire, the shadows dancing across his scarred face. For a long time, the only sound was the wind outside. "I had a sister," he began, his voice barely audible. "Astrid. She was small, like you, full of light. I was supposed to protect her. I was the eldest. I ran back, but the house was burning. Astrid was gone." Brynhild reached out, covering his massive hand with hers. He didn't pull away. "I went mad," Skarde continued, tears leaking from his closed eyes. "I hunted them. It took me 3 weeks. I found their camp. There were 12 of them. I didn't fight them like a warrior. I didn't challenge them to honorable combat. I slaughtered them. I tore them apart with my bare hands. I became the monster they feared." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with self-loathing. "When I returned, covered in blood that wasn't mine, my father looked at me with horror. He said I had no honor. He said I was a rabid dog. He cast me out, and he was right." Fiercely squeezing his hand, "He was wrong. You are not a monster, Skarde. You are a man who loved too deeply and grieved too hard. You punished yourself for a moment of absence with a lifetime of solitude. That is not monstrosity. I fear a life without purpose, but I do not fear you." In that moment, the bond between them shifted. It was no longer a marriage of convenience. It was a partnership forged in the fire of shared pain. Spring came slowly to the mountain, but life in the cabin had changed. Laughter, tentative at first, began to fill the room. They worked together, Brynhild tending the garden she had planted, Skarde expanding the barn. They ate together, talked together. Brynhild discovered that beneath the silence, Skarde had a dry, sharp wit. Skarde discovered that Brynhild's sharp tongue was mostly a defense against a world that had rejected her. But the world was not done with them. One afternoon, the sound of horses shattered their peace. 3 warriors appeared on the mountain path, their armor gleaming in the sun. They wore the red and black colors of Skarde's old clan, the Grimson clan. Skarde stood in the doorway of the cabin, an axe in his hand, his body tense. Brynhild stood beside him. The leader of the riders reined in his horse. It was Thorvald, Skarde's younger brother. He had the same dark eyes, but where Skarde's were full of sorrow, Thorvald's were cold and cruel. "So the rumors are true," Thorvald sneered, looking from Skarde to Brynhild. "The beast has found a pet. This is not Grimson land. The clan father is dying," Thorvald announced, showing no emotion. "The Bjornsson clan is massing on our southern border. They sense weakness. Father calls for his exiled son. You are summoned, Skarde. You are to lead the vanguard." Skarde went pale. He stood in the doorway, his frame filling the space. "I am exiled," he said. "I am dead to the clan." "Exile is revoked when we need meat for the grinder," Thorvald laughed. "Let's be honest, brother. It is a suicide mission. Father wants you to die fighting so he doesn't have to think about his mistake anymore. He offers you a chance to reclaim your honor in death. Or," Thorvald's eyes drifted to the cabin, "or would you rather hide here and wait for the Bjornssons to come and burn this shack, and your woman, to the ground?" Brynhild stepped forward, her anger flaring hot. "He is not hiding, he is living." Thorvald ignored her. "We leave at dawn from the village square. Be there, Skarde, or we will brand you a coward and hunt you down ourselves." He wheeled his horse and rode away, his men laughing as they followed. That night was the darkest they had ever known. Skarde sat by the fire, sharpening his axe, his face a mask of stone. He willed Georges to act quietly. "If I refuse, they will come back. They will hurt you to get to me." "It is a trap," Brynhild argued, pacing the room. "They want you to die so Thorvald can claim the chieftainship without a rival. You are walking to your execution." I have no choice, Skarde said, looking at her with hopeless eyes. I am an exile. I have no standing, no voice. Then we must find a voice, Brynhild said, stopping in front of him. You protected your sister too late, but you can protect yourself now. You are not just a warrior, Skarde. You are more. I am nothing, he whispered. You are my husband, she said fiercely, and I will not let you die for their war. She went to her chest and pulled out a long, thick rope braided with silver thread. It was an old, ceremonial object, a unity binding cord used in ancient laws that most had forgotten. What are you doing? Skarde asked. We are going to the village, she said. We are going to fight, but not with swords. The next morning, the village of Valdes was buzzing with tension. Thorvald and his 20 warriors sat on their horses in the square, waiting. The villagers lined the edges, silent and fearful. They expected to see the giant come down and surrender to his fate. Skarde descended the mountain path, but he was not dressed for war. He wore no armor, carried no shield. He wore his simple tunic and trousers, and he was not alone. Brynhild walked beside him, her head high, holding the silver rope that was tied around Skarde's wrists, not as a prisoner, but as a bond. Thorvald sneered as they approached. What is this? Where is your armor, brother? Have you come to beg? Skarde stopped in the center of the square. He looked at his brother, then at the villagers who had scorned him for years. I am not coming to fight, he rumbled, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. And I am not coming to die for a father who wished me dead years ago. Thorvald's hand went to his sword. Then you are a coward and a traitor. Wrong! Brynhild's voice rang out like a bell. She stepped in front of Skarde, raising the rope. I claim the right of unity. I bind this man to me. Under the old laws, a wife may claim her husband's life from the clan if she can prove his worth to the community outweighs his duty to war. Thorvald roared, his face turning red. He has no worth. He is a monster who kills for pleasure. Is he? Brynhild turned to the crowd, searching the faces. Is that who you see? She pointed a shaking finger at a young boy hiding behind his mother's skirts. Olaf, step forward. The boy hesitated, then crept out. Tell them, Brynhild commanded gently. Tell them about your leg. He carried me home. A murmur ran through the crowd. Brynhild turned to the widow Helga. And you, Helga, when the snows trapped you last winter, who left fresh bread and salted meat on your doorstep. You thought it was the spirits. It was Skarde. Skarde looked down, his face burning. He had done these things in secret, under the cover of darkness, ashamed to be seen, and the bridge over the roaring stream. The blacksmith shouted, stepping forward. It was fixed overnight. Massive stones moved that no ordinary man could lift. It was him. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. They had seen the signs. They had felt the quiet, unseen protection of the giant on the mountain. They had chosen to believe the scary stories because it was easier, but the truth was undeniably standing before them. He is a healer, cried the baker. He is a builder, shouted the carpenter. He is one of us, yelled the blacksmith. Thorvald looked around, his horse shifting nervously as the crowd surged forward, forming a protective wall around Skarde and Brynhild. He realized with a shock that he had lost. He had the swords, but he did not have the people. This is madness, Thorvald spat. You choose a monster over your rightful leaders. We choose a man, Brynhild said, her voice cutting through the noise. A man who builds instead of destroys. A man who bakes bread while you sharpen swords. Go fight your own war, Thorvald. Skargrimson is home. Thorvald glared at his brother with pure hatred. You are truly dead to us now, he hissed. Don't let me see your face again. He wheeled his horse and galloped out of the village, his warriors trailing behind him. Silence settled over the square. Skarde looked down at his hands, then at the people surrounding him. For the first time in his life, he didn't see fear in their eyes. He saw respect. He saw acceptance. He turned to Brynhild. Tears were streaming down his scarred cheeks into his beard. You, he choked out. You saved me. Brynhild smiled, reaching up to wipe a tear from the face of the giant she loved. No, Skarde, she whispered. You saved yourself. I just turned on the light so they could see you. She untied the silver cord from his wrists and took his massive hand in hers. Now, she said, let's go home. The bread is rising. They returned to the mountain, not as exiles, but as the guardians of the valley. In the years that followed, the Eriksson holding was no longer lonely. It became a place where the sick came for healing, where the hungry came for bread, and where children came to hear stories from the gentle giant who carved birds that looked like they could fly. And every night, as the sun set over the fjord, Skarde would look at his wife, the woman the world had called unwanted, and know that he was the richest man in all the north, because he had found the one thing stronger than steel and warmer than fire, a soft heart that beat in rhythm with his own.